the Reverend W. Awdry.
Welcome.
That's wonderful. Now, what about Thomas the Tank Engine? You see, it's proved to be enormously popular all over the world. What's the reason for the popularity? Have you ever thought why?
I just don't know, except that children found themselves able to identify with the different characters of my engine.
You've been obsessed with steam trains, though, all your life.
Why?
The Reverend Wilbert Awdry, creator of the Railway series books, whose character, Thomas the Tank Engine, spawned TV series, films, toys and theme parks. It's more than 80 years since the first stories were created, inspired by Awdry's time living in the West Country. I'm Nick Dewars, and in this programme I'll explore the writer's connection with our part of the world, from Wiltshire to Gloucestershire and beyond, finding out why, after all these years, his work still has an enduring appeal, and meeting some of the people who knew him best, starting with his family.
Oh, hello.
Veronica.
It must be Nick.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Come in. Right, welcome to Sodor, number 30. I'm Veronica Chambers. I was Awdry, being the middle child of Wilbert and Margaret Awdry.
The Awdry family still have the house in Rodborough in Stroud, where Wilbert Awdry and his wife moved to when he retired from ministry in the 1960s. He'd been a vicar for several years before he wrote any books. As we'll find out, Reverend Awdry's version of retirement kept him busy. It's where he wrote the last few Railway series books. But first, let's hear from Veronica about where Thomas and the Railway series stories began.
The beginning was when my brother was ill, and that was when my father was a curate working in Kings Norton in Birmingham during the war. Measles was it's still not a very nice thing to have, but particularly then, it could affect the eyes. And so Christopher was getting better, getting a bit sort of scratchy, if you like, fed up with being in bed and in a dim room. And Father used to recite poems and sing songs to him, and there was just one poem, the song that he liked the best. Down at the station early in the morning, see the little engines all in a row. Along comes the driver, turns the little handle, poof, poof, beep, beep, off we go. I'm not going to sing it for you, so don't.
No, that's fine.
To make it a bit more interesting, not just reciting this, Father illustrated the song, if you like, with head-on pictures of locomotives, which are very easy to draw if you do them head-on. Just a round a boiler and a funnel, and the handle can serve as a nose, and then you can obviously put in eyebrows, eyes and a mouth. And the mouth was the thing that expressed what each one was feeling. So you had a sad one, a surprised one, an unhappy one, a happy one, and so on. And Christopher's favourite, if you like, was the one that was a bit sad. This led to them making up a story between them, because Christopher said, "Why is he sad?" So Father had to think of something fairly rapidly, because he hasn't been out for a long time. Why hasn't he been out for a long time? Because all the other engines are bigger and stronger than him. And what's his name? And Edward was the first name that came into Father's head, so Edward he was. And they built up a story between them to work out how Edward, on his day out, could come out of the shed at last. And that was the first story.
So Edward, not Thomas, was Awdry's first Railway series creation in 1943. To truly understand the origins of the stories, we need to jump back in time even further, to the early 1920s and the village of Box in Wiltshire. Claire Diamond Mills is a historian and tour guide there.
Wilbert's father, Veer, was a huge railway enthusiast.
And he took loads of photographs down at Box Station of trains when they first moved here in the early 1900s. And he also, allegedly, according to the people who bought the house from him, the Bences, had a model railway in the shed out the back. So his dad's a big train fanatic. It makes sense that you'd want to live in Box for that reason then, because obviously the trains go through from London to Bath and then on to Bristol. And so that's kind of, I'm guessing, why he likes trains to begin with, because he's kind of surrounded by them.
You can just hear a train, because that must be the tunnel there, is it?
Tunnel is there.
Okay.
So he literally is metres from Box Tunnel, and of course it's steam trains, so he would have been able to, we can hear the normal trains now, but you imagine the steam trains, and the noise would have been really loud and he'd have been able to hear that. So the whole reason we had a train station at Box is because Brunel was worried that the trains wouldn't be able to get up the incline through the tunnel. Okay, so he put a station here with a banker engine, so that if the trains needed a bit of an extra oomph up the incline inside the tunnel, then we had that option here at Box. So that's why we had a station here at Box. So obviously, a bit like us, there are some people that power up a hill, don't even break a sweat, and those of us that chug along huffing and puffing. And what Awdry realised as a little boy is that steam trains were the same, and some powered up and others were like, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And that's where you then get the difference between the different trains. So you've got Gordon, who's the big blue one who powers on through, and then you've got poor old Henry, who takes it a bit slowly and makes probably a bit more noise as he's going through. And so the idea that these steam trains, these steamies, had personalities, had characters of their own, must have stayed with Awdry. And it's all because the tunnel is at an incline and we're at the bottom here at Box, and Corsham is higher up.
The two engines would push the heavy train up the hill into Box Tunnel. And I used to hear the engines talking to each other. The train engine would say, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it. And the banker coming up behind would say, oh yes you can, oh yes you can, oh yes you can, oh yes you can. And they would come, I can't do it, oh yes you can, I can't do it, oh yes you can. Until you couldn't hear them quarrelling anymore, and they got into Box Tunnel.
Hello, Lawn House. Yes, certainly. What day were you looking for? 24th, yep. Is that a double room? So, come on up.
Liz Matthews runs a bed and breakfast in Box and has a blue plaque on the side of the building. That's because it's Lawn House, or Journey's End, where Wilbert lived as a boy.
So we understand that this room here on the back corner of the house was his bedroom that he shared with his brother when he was a child. And the railway line runs obliquely behind us between Middle Hill Tunnel and Box Tunnel. And of course in his day it was steam trains, so they were loud.
How long have you been here?
We've been here 7 years now.
And were you aware when you were sort of first looking around and interested in the property about its history?
Well, not until we came here, not until we were looking at it, we didn't realise. I mean, I had driven past it a million times and seen it had a blue plaque on the outside, but never really stopped to sort of see who it was for or what the association was.
And what level of interest does Lawn House generate in terms of, I don't know, Thomas Railway Series enthusiasts, people who are aware of the books and the, various other incarnations, TV series, etc.?
Well, we do have some people who specifically come because of the connection with Reverend Awdry. You'd be surprised how many adult fans there are of Thomas the Tank Engine. We've had people from America, from Canada, from Australia, who've, made a point of coming here because of that connection. Similarly, we have a lot of people who come who have no idea that this was the childhood home of Reverend Awdry, but who come in and go, oh my goodness, I love those books when I was a child, or my children love those books, and then they want to walk up to the railway and, look at the tunnels and then go home and tell everyone that, they stayed in the home of Reverend Awdry.
Do you feel you have a sort of responsibility to know then about his backstory when these people come? Have you had to do a lot of reading up?
Well, yes, because people ask questions, so we feel like we ought to have a little bit of... I mean, personally, I'm quite interested anyway. You know, it's absolutely fascinating to think that, you know, this house has been here since, you know, late 1800s, and, you know, the various people that have been here, including Reverend Awdry. But, yeah, no, I'm fascinated. We recently had 15 people from Sony from Japan. Sony now own the creative license for Thomas the Tank Engine. And, yeah, so there are lots of questions, lots of photographs. So, yeah, I feel very responsible for making sure that I'm up to date with all the information.
Do people specifically book here because they know of its past?
Some people do. I mean, a minority, I would say, probably less than 5%. Probably only 2% of our guests come here because of the connection with Reverend Awdry and Thomas the Tank Engine.
Just looking around the room, there aren't any sort of real signs. I guess you could have Thomasified it. You could have railway seriesed the room. You know, there's no signs in this room that this was kind of where he was.
So the bedroom, I mean, it's a bed and breakfast. So the bedrooms are, you know, of a certain standard, and I think Thomas the Tank Engine duvets and things might be a little bit de trop. But you'll see downstairs we've got the books, we've got a few trains about the place. So there's a few little nods to Thomas the Tank Engine.
I'm Nick Dewars, and this is a special programme celebrating the Reverend Wilbert Awdry and his railway series stories. Now, we've already heard how Reverend Awdry started telling stories about trains when his son Christopher became ill with measles. Well, how was it then that those stories, told at bedtime, found their way into print? Here's the Reverend Awdry's daughter, Veronica.
Anybody who has children, you know that if they have favourite stories, always the same words and phrases have got to be used, and you'll be told off if that's not right, Daddy, or whatever, if you're not reading it correctly. So the same thing applied to one that's just being told. And so it was in self-defence that Father actually scribbled these down on scrap pieces of paper. So they were there for the one story. Mm.
And then was it your mother who sort of said, "Oh, I think you could make more of these into a, you know, actually get them published"?
Yeah, she and my grandmother, my father's mother, were instrumental. By now, Father had written, well, they'd composed another 2 stories between them. And, yeah, there weren't many books around, because you've got to remember it was wartime, shortage of paper and everything else. And so Father didn't think much of them, but both my mother and my grandmother thought there was some mileage in them, if you like. And eventually, through my grandmother, they were hawked around to various editors. And finally, a man called Edmund Ward decided that he would like to publish them as long as there were pictures to illustrate each part of the story.
And in terms of the illustration side of things, obviously your father had done some, but there have been several illustrators in the time that the books have been around.
Yeah. Father, because of his railway knowledge and the way things worked, for him, even though they were stories for children to entertain, they were real locomotives, and therefore everything had to be correct. Wheel numbers, points, signals, everything else. So he could sketch what they looked like, but needed somebody obviously to do the actual artist's work.
The first of Wilbert Awdry's 26 railway series books was published in May 1945. Awdry was keen to make sure his stories were based on real-life events, as he told the BBC's Desert Island Discs programme in 1964.
Given the assumption that a steam locomotive has personality and can express its feelings, everything else has to have happened to some engine, somewhere, sometime.
We used to listen to Father reading aloud what he had written, because it was important that it sounded right, that there weren't too many words, that he didn't talk down to children, but also that the language he tried to use was so that any adult reading them wouldn't get catatonically bored.
That's massive. To me, as a father of 2 young kids, that's massively important, because it's the ones that you trudge for you as a parent, trying to...
think he did try to get over that as far as possible to make it, but also to carry the story along. Yeah. And 80 to 90 words is not very much to do that, really.
How did your father sort of marry the two together in terms of his life, in terms of his work in the church and then being a writer? Did he have a particular routine? Did one sort of take precedent over the other? Priority over the other, I should say?
I would say, if I'm asked this, he was first and foremost a parish priest. That was his calling, that was his job. But he always tried to put aside one day a week to concentrate on writing, because he needed a bit of a break anyway. But should anything happen and any parishioner need him, obviously that came first. But normally he tried to have one day, and also to relax. His relaxation was to go and work on his model railway upstairs, which was the way of leaving things behind and being in a world of your own for a little while and relaxing. The first parish we were in Ellsworth, there were some outhouses, which must have been very cold in the winter, but that's where he started one there. And then the second vicarage that we moved to was a Victorian one, and there were 3 attics upstairs, one of which we had, the smallest one, and he had the other 2 and made a hole in the wall between the 2 and had a layout there, and that was where he worked out things for the railway and would disappear. He would make scenery, lay more track, work out railway stories perhaps, yes.
What do you think he kind of took from the 2 activities, being in the church and being a writer? Because they're quite different in a way, I think.
They are quite different, but I do remember that at the 50th anniversary of his ordination, he put together some prayers, and one of them said, well, thanks for various things, but one was for the God-given gift of storytelling, which he felt had given him access in the nicest possible way to people worldwide, children, their parents, and made him more approachable in many ways. And this is what led him eventually to retire, because he used to get a lot of letters from parents and other people asking him for advice on things. And he would always write back, and also to children who'd read the books. But it was time-consuming to do it properly. And so he honestly felt that he could do more good in the world by using that gift in a different way. His desk was over diagonally across that corner. And
Wilbert Awdry's study at his home in Stroud is where he wrote a number of the Railway Series books. And although the room's been changed since he died in 1997, there are still reminders of his time there.
There was a filing cabinet and there were bookshelves all across there.
So he had a whole room of things that he could use to research his books and kind of help him with what he was writing.
Yes, my parents were here from 1965 onwards. My mother died in 1989. My father didn't like to be here for a while, but once he got back with various lovely carers, he was here until 1997, when he himself died.
2 very comfy-looking chairs either side of the fireplace, against the far wall of the room. Lots of railway books and a Thomas model there, and also, just behind you there, actually, a Thomas the Tank Engine play set. And I guess your dad would have used this room when the TV series was just coming to prominence from the sort of early 80s onwards.
84, wasn't it? Yeah. I think that was the first ones.
The Railway series had been in print for more than 30 years when Reverend Awdry met Britt Allcroft, a television writer and producer who was keen to make a TV programme based on the books. At the start, Awdry was sceptical, because it wasn't the first time someone had tried to adapt his books for TV.
I think initially he was very doubtful that she could make anything of it, because ingrained in his memory was the ill-fated BBC TV thing that just didn't work.
June 1953, the month of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, and the month the first TV adaptation of the Railway series books hit the buffers. The BBC's adaptation, using model railway trains, quite literally derailed when one of the engines came off the tracks and a member of the production team had to pick it up and put it back on again during the broadcast.
If you're trying to tell a story and a big hand comes over and moves something, it sort of spoils it all.
Viewers complained about the programme. Wilbert Awdry told the BBC to sort it out or cancel the show. The BBC's director of programmes at the time described the show as pathetic, and it was never seen again. It was 20 years later that a British theatre legend and self-proclaimed fan of the books had talks with Reverend Awdry about producing his own musical adaptation, which would later become one of the inspirations for one of his biggest stage hits.
Andrew Lloyd Webber was familiar with the books, and I think at one stage he and, was it Richard Stilgoe? They had an idea they would like to try and transfer these things to the stage, and it didn't actually happen then. When Starlight Express did come out, we saw it and got tickets sent to my parents, actually. I think they found it a bit loud, but quite interesting, because it's a fascinating show, absolutely fascinating.
Starlight Express, are you real? Yes or no?
That's a great photo.
That's Ringo Starr, and the lady sitting on the bank is, I believe, Britt Allcroft. 1984.
Right.
That gives the date.
So on this quiet street in Stroud, a beetle turned up at the house.
True, yeah.
What was that like?
My parents kept it very low profile, as they should, really, because they didn't want lots of people around. But obviously afterwards that was different. But fortunately the weather was fine. You can see they're actually out in the garden.
Because sometimes when you say Thomas the Tank Engine, people try and do a slightly dodgy impression of Ringo Starr telling the story. Sometimes people see him as the sort of voice that, you know...
He was the original voice of, but I think there have been others since, haven't there? So...
Was your father happy with that choice? Did he have any say in the choice of Ringo Starr being the person who narrated the Thomas the Tank Engine TV series?
I mean, it was Britt who heard the voice. She didn't know who it was. She just heard the voice and she said, that's the person who I feel will tell these stories as they should be told.
And Britt Allcroft is the creator, the producer who went to your father and said, I'd like to turn these into a TV programme.
And that was her choice. She didn't know who it was. It was just going on the voice. And then it moved on from there.
Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a big station on the island of Sodor. He's a cheeky little engine with 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler and a short stumpy dome.
And that combination of your father's words and his voice really seemed to work.
Indeed, it did. It did very well, I thought. It was fascinating to us because we did have a visit to the studios and saw the actual models and things, and Britt had put such a lot into it because she totally believed in what she was doing, and I think Father was impressed with the way they came over.
There've been more than 20 series of Thomas shown in at least 180 countries around the world. Now living in the US, TV producer Britt Allcroft spoke to BBC South Today in 2015 and said Awdry's characters were key to its success.
The engines experience all the same kind of emotions: happiness, sadness, disappointment, making up with friends and so on, that little children experience.
From its beginnings in the bedtime thoughts of a Wiltshire schoolboy, the Railway series and Thomas had worldwide exposure.
Oh, Thomas the Tank Engine.
Yeah, it's a Roy Cropper moment.
Oh, that's fantastic, Tony friends.
Our Liam used to love Thomas the Tank Engine, didn't he, Helen?
Thomas was everywhere, even appearing in episodes of Coronation Street and The Simpsons.
It's like a Thomas the Tank Engine. We can go inside. With no Sir Topham hat to tell us what we can and can't do.
Awdry's books had numerous different characters: Gordon, Henry, James and others. But TV productions have tended to have Thomas in their title. Awdry's daughter Veronica says that's something he took a little bit of time to get used to.
He did actually come to realise that there had to be a focus, and because the original model that he'd made for Christopher had a number 1 on the side, then Thomas was number 1. None of the other engines had numbers in the first place, but they did, I think, after Henry the Green Engine, I believe that the numbers came up, because we were quite surprised, but in fact it was just something that evolved. You had to have somebody who was the main person, if you like. Didn't mean they were the most important, but yeah.
You know, over the years there have been so many adaptations. Do you see that as a sort of natural development over the course of time, or does it sort of in any way dilute your father's work, do you think?
It depends on where you're coming from. Obviously, we as a family favour the classical, but they are still there in tandem with the others. We understand, I think, the reasoning, if you like, behind the cartoons. I think children nowadays, young ones, just have such short attention spans, and studies have shown that they need something that just keeps going all the time. So a span of the original videos, they would have moved away and got bored.
Do you like Thomas Wilbs?
Yeah.
Who's your favourite?
Diesel and Thomas.
But why do you like Diesel? He's the baddie.
Because he's funny and he has good adventures.
Oh, right.
Thomas, yeah!
Thomas and friends, big world, big adventures. Let's discover the world, but where should we go?
I'm Nick Dewars, and this is a special programme celebrating the Reverend Wilbert Awdry and his Railway Series books. And as you can tell there, my kids love a bit of Thomas. And so do lots of other young people, of course. Rodborough Community Primary School is just a stone's throw from where Awdry lived in Stroud. I caught up with teacher Mrs. Kirkham and pupil Matilda to get their thoughts on a local hero.
One of my favourite characters is Thomas, of course. When I was watching it, it was always so funny.
When you've got someone local, like just there, or someone who lived locally, and they were so creative and so kind of, famous, does that sort of make you think, oh yeah, I want to do something like that? I want to kind of come up with ideas like that.
Kind of. It's pretty cool that, like, down the hill from my house, a quite famous writer lived.
It's amazing having this local resource where we've got Reverend Awdry, we've got the stained glass window in the local church, which we often take them to go and see. He was really well placed to write his books here because we've got our railway. Brunel built the Stroud railway station, and we learn a lot about the Great Western Railway. So it all links in really nicely. The fact that children still know who he is makes it relevant. I think it's been updated over time with what we see on TV. But ultimately, the stories are still the stories. The same characters are being brought through. And children's love of trains and vehicles doesn't go away.
Sam's.
Yeah, so trains, vehicles.
Oh, we were also doing trains this morning.
We were, yeah. Doesn't go away. And actually, I think they are still relevant. You know, certainly children maybe younger than this absolutely love Thomas the Tank Engine, and they come in inspired, and you can use that as a way in to still teach, you know, making railway tracks and writing about the characters.
From Rodborough in Gloucestershire to almost 7,000 miles away in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the home of Yone, her husband Matt, and their son Garai.
So my name is Yone. I come from the Basque Country in the north of Spain, and I currently work in Kuala Lumpur in an international school as an art teacher for secondary students. And here I have Garay, and he's my son. And maybe he wants to introduce himself. Would that be okay?
Hello, my name is Garay, and I'm 8 years old. And I go to the same school that my mom teaches. When I was little, I used to love, like, every time we went on road trips, we used to always play this Thomas the Tank Engine song, like, over and over again. I still have some puzzles from when I was little, and I also had, like, this giant train set where I could put the trains in and just, like, make my own train set where I could move the Thomas the Tank engines around the set that I made.
Fantastic. Do you know which song it was?
It was like, go, go, Thomas, Thomas number one, something like that.
Yeah, I know exactly the one. Yeah. Were you living in Malaysia at that time of your life?
Yeah. And then so I realized about it, so I started liking it. One day I was wondering if they had a song, like a Thomas the Tank Engine song. So then I searched it up, and then there was. And then I loved it so much that every road trip we normally just played it over and over again.
I know that's like for the parents, you just get those songs stuck in your head. So I'll be walking around at work and I'll be like humming these songs and singing them, and people are like, "What are you saying?" And then you realise you're kind of singing a kid's song out loud. Do you have a favourite train? Because obviously there's quite a few trains in the series. Do you have a favourite one?
There was a train called Percy. At school, I used to bring these tiny little, like, Thomas the Tank Engine books and then borrow them and read them at home and then return them.
And Yone, for you as Garay's mum, what makes the series, the books, the TV programmes appealing to you?
Well, I think it was a very relatable type of character, and the stories. There was a problem, and then they have to resolve it, and how they work together, or how they figure it out, how to conclude it, or how to save somebody. And then it always tends to finish in a very positive way. So it's perfect for children in the sense that, you know, there's always a bit, let's say, it's hidden learning, but it's there because it's all these kind of, it's like fables in a way, isn't it? Where because of the little stories, then you get to learn about each character and their personality traits, I guess. Yeah, there's no hitting, or there's no guns, there's no fighting. Maybe one of them cries one day because something happens, but yeah, overall, very positive.
The themes that they explore are kind of timeless, aren't they?
Yeah.
Friendship, being nice to others. It doesn't matter what time it happens. It's all things that can be carried on regardless of the generation. I think that's why it's endured as much as it has, and it's well written.
Hi guys, how are you?
Yes, Jane, how are you?
Good, thank you. You're on the 11:30 train. We're coach C, seat 20.
Wilbert Awdry's passion for trains extended to him getting heavily involved at the Talith Llyn, a heritage line in North Wales. Closer to his childhood home in Wiltshire is the Swindon and Cricklade Railway, which today is hosting a special Thomas-themed event, where Emma Titcombe is a volunteer.
I think he's a firm family favourite. We all love him here, and this is our favourite day of the year, and I think so many others feel the same. They love seeing Thomas, so we're glad we can bring him to Swindon.
It's 80 years since the first railway series stories were told by the Reverend Awdry. What do you think the enduring appeal is of Thomas and the other engines?
I think he's just a classic, isn't he? Everyone loves him, and the fact that you can come and see him live as a huge steam engine is just great. I think that's what everyone loves about him. It's in my blood. Trains and the heritage railways are in my blood. It's in both sides of my family, and I've made some of my best friends here. I really enjoy my time here. We have lots of fun, and seeing the faces of all the families when we pull off these events is just, and hearing their feedback of how much fun they've had, it really makes it, yeah.
Do you think Thomas and kind of the ongoing interest, we've talked about it 80 years now, does that draw people's attention a bit more to steam and heritage railways and kind of encourage interest in them?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Some people might have never visited a heritage railway until they found out that we can bring Thomas to them. So, yeah, it can open their eyes to what we are. We have been known as Wiltshire's, best kept secret. So the fact that we can bring something as great as Thomas here can bring in and open people's eyes to what we do, and, the fact we've maybe been hiding away from them.
This is a really busy event, thousands of people here over the course of the weekend. It must take a lot to organise, and you rely a lot on volunteers, don't you? In fact, all on volunteers.
Yes, we are. Every single one of us here is a volunteer. We give up our time to be here to pull off these events. A lot of my team members actually give up their annual leave and book their holidays to be here to pull off these events. We are very passionate about it. We rely a lot on donations to keep us going. We are a charity as well. So, yeah, keeping the history alive and making people aware of us to come and visit us, it's really important that, we keep those donations coming in so we can keep going and keep teaching people about the history and the heritage and keep it at the forefront so we don't get overtaken by all the mod cons and whatnot. So
how important is a day like today or this weekend to what you do and kind of bringing the money in?
This is a really important event to us. This is our second time doing it, but it is our biggest event. It does bring in a lot of money for us, so it's worth the long hours, long days and the lot of hard work that our volunteers put in. We are the Thomas event for the South West, so we draw people in from lots of different areas now by doing this event.
Please do make your way on board Thomas. Now, this is the 11:30 Thomas.
Obviously a really big and lovely event here today and over the course of the weekend, but from what you're saying, you need people to come along on the other days that you're running the trains.
Yes, definitely. Our standard running days, we also need people to come and visit us to help spread the word about us and to help us get that valuable income, and our other special events that we run throughout the year, because it makes it all worthwhile for our hard-working, very tired volunteers.
Right, here we go then. Thomas is making his way down the tracks towards the platform at the Swindon and Cricklade Railway. That familiar blue engine, of course, with a black funnel and those wide eyes, and lots of wide-eyed excitement among the people here waiting as well to see him. People have come from all over the place to be here today. It's the only visit that the Thomas steam train is making to a heritage railway in the southwest of England, and lots of excitement to see him here today.
Well, we saw it advertised and he's very keen on Thomas. In fact, he's keen on all trains. Thought we'd give it a try.
And what have you been up to so far?
Well, we've been on Thomas and been up and down the track, and we've been around the entertainment bits.
And has this little one enjoyed it?
Oh, he loves it. This is Alfie.
Alfie.
And he mainly enjoys sticking his head out the windows.
Oh, yeah.
It's been fun. He's really enjoyed seeing the train in real life. And then he's been in the waiting room, played with the Brio train, played with the games in the tent. It's all sort of Thomasy things. So I don't think he's particularly focused on Thomas, but it's the train that's for him.
Have you been here before?
I haven't, no. Didn't even know it was here.
Well, this is it, and you're from Wiltshire. They're calling it Swindon and Wiltshire's best kept secret, and I think it probably is a little bit. Yeah. I mean, we've driven past the station quite a few times and looked, but never sort of felt the urge to go in there. But Thomas just gives you that a bit of attraction. Yeah. To bring the kids out.
Do you feel like you might come back at some stage?
Oh yeah, we'll come back. Even when it's not Thomas, I think we'll come back. Alfie really likes trains and stuff, so that was the added incentive to give us the excuse to come.
Actually, my son, he's a fan of Thomas. So do Island. Yeah, and he's all about trains. Yeah.
He's having autism, but he knows so much about trains, and he will know each and every engine under Thomas. And I think so he knows much more than us. Yeah.
I'm Nick Dewars, and this is a special programme about the Reverend Wilbert Awdry, creator of the Railway Series books and Thomas the Tank Engine. We've heard already about how Awdry was inspired by living close to the railway near Brunel's Box Tunnel in Wiltshire. Historian Claire Diamond Mills takes people on tours of Box and thinks it wasn't just the railway that inspired Awdry. More on that in a moment. But first, I was keen to see the tunnel for myself. So this is us coming up to, what do we call this, the Western Portal? What do they call it?
The Western Portal, the box side. There we go.
So we're looking down at the sort of gaping entrance of the Box Tunnel there in the hillside. Box Tunnel was the longest railway tunnel in the world, I think. I read that back when it opened.
1.83 miles long. It was the longest railway tunnel in the world, and I've got a feeling it's still the longest hand built, if that makes sense. So without using big bits of kit, still, just using your pickaxes, your shovels, and a bit of dynamite. Yeah. So a few stats on the tunnel. Ton of gunpowder used a week to obviously get rid of to remove the stone. Ton of candles a week. 300 horses. 300,000 bricks. Now, 100 men we think died in the building of the tunnel, but that doesn't include, of course, all the people that were maimed, injured, unlikely to work again. The number one cause of death in the building of the tunnel was bits of stone falling down and donking you on the head and knocking you out. Same in coal mines. There are 12 shafts that run the length of the tunnel. So they were dug from the top of the hill down to where the bottom of the tunnel would be, and they would allow light and ventilation into the tunnel. So as you're digging, obviously you need light and air, particularly once you get to the middle. And it was dug like the Channel Tunnel, so you'd have a group in Corsham and a group in Box, and they would dig towards each other, and you'd hope that they would meet in the middle. Do you want to guess how off they were? 3 inches.
Really? Fantastic. Wow.
Man's a genius.
Yeah.
I have had people on my walk say, "Oh, can we go inside?" Well, 4 trains an hour go through the tunnel, so no, don't go in the tunnel.
No, definitely not. So if we think back then to the 1920s, you've got a young Wilbert Awdry just over the other side of the bridge. We can see what was then Journey's End there, and he's lying in bed, and the trains are creeping up out of the tunnel.
That's right. Smoke going.
Yeah.
The boop boop of the trains coming through. Yeah, it would have been, you'd really be able to smell them as well. That smoky, steamy smell. You'd have been able to smell them, hear them. So it would have been incredibly inspiring. The noise, the smell, the trains coming through the tunnel or going into the tunnel. He'd have been able to hear it from his house. It's highly likely that he would have walked up and down this road. So although we're not by water here, I always imagine Brendon Docks in Thomas the Tank Engine, where you've got it's a water docks, but you've got the big cranes, Cranky the Crane, is that right? Yeah. The big cranes or the trains pulling up and then either unloading or, in this case, loading up the stone. So you can, the sound of the craftsmen working the stone, the cranes, the movement of goods. You can see how this as well would have really inspired Awdry. There are, I'm pretty certain, 3, I could be wrong, they might have added more, 3 slate or stone quarries on the Isle of Sodor.
And is that what you think is a sort of secret inspiration?
Yeah, definitely. The main entrance to the box quarries is further up Box Hill. Right. You'll see that there's a building that looks like offices and doesn't look like a house next to Box Garage. That's the offices of Bath and Portland Stone Company, and the entrance to the quarry is behind there. From there you can walk out to Neston. Fun fact for you, the furthest away building built of box stone is the town hall in Cape Town.
Really?
I'm assuming they have stone in Cape Town, so I would imagine it's just the facade. But if you Google Town Hall Cape Town, the facade looks like it could come from Bath. It could be a building in Bath, but you've got Table Mountain in the background and then these big palm trees in front of it. So the reach of box stone was all around the world because we had this massive empire. And then, Thomas has done the same 50 years later, again, all inspired by Box Stone.
Reverend Wilbert Awdry died in 1997 at Sodor, the house in Stroud he'd named after the setting for so many of his books. He was 85. His ashes were buried with those of his wife Margaret in the churchyard at St Mary Magdalene Church in Rodborough, where there's also a stained glass window which he commissioned.
No, at least the grass has been clipped around it. It's obviously, the churchyard has been done recently, but I shall be up and just wash over it and put some flowers, generally, what I do when I'm here. So. For 30 years, it was part of everything that went on here and in the diocese, basically.
So we have Margaret Emily Awdry, that's your mother.
Yeah.
And then obviously your father, Reverend Wilbert Vere Awdry, who died March 21st, 1997. And it says, he helped people to see God in the ordinary things of life, and he made children laugh. And that's what he always wanted to have put on it.
Absolutely. That was what he said.
Well, should we walk towards the church and see this lovely stained glass window I've heard about?
Imagine Father sitting over there under the pulpit in his wheelchair. He would look over there and it was a plain window, and he wanted to give the church something to beautify it, but in memory of Mum. And after many years and lots of discussion with the person who designed it, he did see the finished design with the colour, but didn't actually see it installed.
I mean, it is beautiful, and I presume that just looking at it, we have Thomas, and I'm not sure the engine next to Thomas is there.
No, our grandson actually wondered about that, but I don't think it's any particular one. It's just another one, because Thomas was never on his own, was he really? So.
And the light's just coming in and really highlighting the blue of Thomas. And to the right, we have a gentleman in a flat cap. And I presume that's your dad.
It is. It's very definitely him. Yeah, very definitely him. Yeah. With, as my mother would say, a rather disreputable flat cap. Yeah.
What do you think he would have made of it?
I think he would have been pleased, actually, because, as I say, he saw the coloured version, coloured template of the actual thing before he died. And so he knew what it was going to look like, and I think he was pleased with that, yeah.
You're here relatively often. Do you always make sure you come up and have a look at the stained glass window?
Generally, if I'm up and, I say, looking after the grave, I know that the church will be open if I come in the morning, and I usually come in.
I'm John Atkinson. I'm church warden for St Mary Magdalene in Rodborough.
How much does it help the church having something like this, do you think?
Oh,
the interest?
Yes, I think it does. I think it brings people in, and we want that. It's important that the church stays open and available to the community, and this is one of the ways in which we draw people in. Last Saturday, I led a family in to see it. They were on their way home from Devon, and their son was a train enthusiast, well, Thomas enthusiast. They asked, could they come and see the window? It's popular.
Yeah, what do people make of it when they come in? How does it sort of, do they stand and look at it? What do they sort of do?
Yes, and they try to interpret, of course, particularly the lower right panel with Reverend Awdry closing the doors. And of course they read the blurb that we have on it and understand it's really commemorating his wife and family.
As someone with an association with the church, how conscious are you of Reverend Awdry and his sort of links to this area and what he means?
I've lived here just 7 years, but I was immediately aware of his presence in the area. And, people know the church for that reason. We had, a few Christmases ago now, a Thomas-themed Christmas celebration with a local choir. That went down very well. And as I say, we have regularly visitors coming in to see the window.
What did this church mean to your father?
I think a lot actually, because when my parents moved here, once they'd sort of settled down, my mother got involved with supply teaching, and my father, yes, writing okay in the correspondence, but he applied to the bishop for a licence to be able to practice within the diocese. And so he was in great demand, going and filling in where there were people away. And he was able to go to Church of England, various ones, and he just loved that experience because it gave him a different view of things. And also he made friends, and, well, they did make friends, and there was always that link, which was very important. And he went around various different churches and travelling, and Mother used to go with him. Yeah, so
he could have just come here and sort of retired and lived in his house and written some books, but he was actively involved in the community.
Because it was just as much part of his life, actually. He was first and foremost a parish priest, and so to be able to continue that was very special.
I'm Nick Dewars, and I'm coming to the end of my journey around the west of England, finding out about the people and places that inspired Reverend Wilbert Awdry, the creator of the Railway series and Thomas the Tank Engine. But before we reach our terminus, his daughter Veronica's been telling me about her dad's legacy.
First and foremost, he was my dad, and to that extent, you don't think about your parents as being, they're special to you, but they're not special necessarily to other people. And it was only after a certain time that one realised that actually lots of people thought he was special. He was somebody who could always take a joke against himself, which you need to, I think, when you're in his line of work. And he would make a point of relating to people in his parish, whether they came to church or not. You're always going to be criticised, aren't you, whatever job you do, the damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of thing. But I know he had a good relationship with a lot of people in the village. I knew a lot of people, did a lot, got involved with young people. And I always remember he was always ready to try and help me with difficult homework if I needed to just sort of push in the right direction. And I am very proud, and I think it's gone on through the family. Certainly, my daughter and my son have both taken on a mantle of doing interviews and things where needed, and also Christopher's son, Richard, who has the same name. And it's there, and you talk to people who've never known him, but still he was a powerful presence in their lives. And also to people who met him. Still, there are people around who've met him, and that's really interesting. It's so fascinating to talk to them.
Do you still feel to some extent you're learning about your dad in that respect then?
Oh, yes, indeed. When we used to have the Days Out with Thomas event down at the railway, I didn't broadcast who I was, but, you know, word goes around, and there were people who used to come and speak to me about it and just say how nice it was to meet me. And one, in the early years of doing it, said, because I had a picture of Father up on the desk, and this person speaking to me didn't know who I was, and he said, that's the man who married me. And so I did tell him then, and we had a lovely chat. Fantastic. So it's little things like that.
In doing my research, and I've obviously been on YouTube and other things, on the internet and seen things. Do you ever look at those videos of your dad? Because not everyone's, will have that privilege of being able to find a bit of an archive of material about relatives.
I suppose not. So much of it is done with so much knowledge and love. It really is.
I guess you can't be a control freak about it because there's just so much of it around to some extent.
No, you can't. You can't be a control freak, and you can just appreciate what is being done, really. And the odd throwaway remark, somebody might say something in your presence. They don't know who you are, but I think, oh, that's nice. Or particularly travelling on the trains, people will still perhaps be clutching a wooden engine or whatever, and it's just really nice.
Do you think what happened to him changed him in terms of the success of the books and then the television series and everything that came with that?
I think he found it difficult to comprehend, really, that so many people were involved. I suppose this comes after the TV and the meeting with Brit and so on, so forth. But I think he always tried to turn that to good. Any financial gain wasn't important to him. In fact, he was pleased to be able to afford a stairlift when my mother needed it, that kind of thing. That was just, by the way, that was it. He liked the fact that people appreciated it. He liked the fact that it brought people to visit our wonderful heritage railways, which they needed the support. And the fact that the stories almost passed down through families, and therefore that interest in railways persisted. So I think that was important to him too. And in later years, the fact that these autistic children related to Thomas, that he didn't understand, but he was still pleased to feel that was so, yeah.
And what do you think was the secret to your father's success and the success of the books and everything that came with it?
Really, I have no idea. You could say, I suppose when the books first came out, there were so few decent books for children around, weren't there, in that time? As to why they carry on when there are so many books around now, that's quite thrilling, really. Yes, of course, there are fashions. Fashions change, don't they? And you get all sorts of criticisms. But like Beatrix Potter, I think they'll always be there somewhere. Let's hope so, anyway.